The Silicon Valley CEOs at Burning Man who are sort of, doing acid quietly and then, not really talking about it in the boardroom.
What are the connections between psychedelic therapy and health?
We know that MDMA helps with PTSD. We know that psilocybin helps with end-of-life anxiety.
Is this a shortcut or is this a best solution?
Elon Musk tweeted recently that he's microdosing ketamine at parties instead of drinking because it helps him deal with his social anxiety.
In this episode, we have Sean McCormick, who is a lifelong meditator, founder of Flotation Centers, psychedelic guide, certified life coach, biohacker, and podcast host. Sean is an expert in performance biohacking and psychedelic personal development. Having tested, studied, and applied hundreds of health and performance approaches for himself and his clients like professional athletes, founders, and executives, Sean knows how to get the most from the least. In this episode, we discussed what is considered psychedelics, the use of psychedelics in optimizing performance and life, as well as the potential drawbacks that they may have. We also talked about sensory deprivation and its role in aiding meditation and its physiological benefits. Stay tuned and enjoy this episode. Hello, Sean. Thank you for coming on to Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. We have Sean McCormick here today. Thank you and welcome.
Oh, I'm so excited. It's always an adventure. You never know where these conversations are going to go. So I'm an open book. Let's dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just on your podcast recently, so it's an honor to be here interviewing you now. So let's tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what do you do and who are you?
Yeah, so I am the host of the Optimal Performance Podcast, which is one of the longest running biohacking podcasts on the internet. It's a top 1% in the world. We have a lot of the same guests, you and I. We've overlapped quite a lot, and you've been on my podcast, and I learned, basically got a college course from you, a one-on-one on ketones in general. So I'm also a performance coach and life coach, and I do a pretty wide array of services and workings with my clients. I work with, professional athletes and television stars, CEOs, entrepreneurs, founders, and I work with people in a lot of niche, fringe, sort of out of the box approaches, from spirituality to psychedelics to biohacking. And, when you've recorded 455 biohacking episodes, you learn a lot. And I use those tools to help my clients grow in a very short period of time with as little work as possible, because that's the heart of biohacking and performance optimization. And, I've started float tank centers. I'm a father. I've drank ayahuasca 200 times. I do all sorts of weird stuff. And so every day is a little bit different for me.
So this is interesting. So on this channel, we talk a lot about metabolic health, about optimizing health and fine-tuning the human experience. Let's talk about psychedelics. We don't talk about that a lot. We've talked about it before, but not in detail. Given your experience here, I think you have a lot of insights to share with us. What is the difference, or what are the connections between psychedelic therapy and health? Let's start with that.
Yeah. Well, there are physical benefits, there are emotional benefits, spiritual benefits, cognitive benefits. When you look at the research being done all over the world, but specifically through phase 2 trials happening at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, we know that MDMA helps with PTSD. We know that psilocybin helps with end-of-life anxiety. The studies are becoming stronger and stronger. So the story in the case is being made for mental health treatments from 5 dried grams of psilocybin combined with therapy. But what people may not know, such a story, is that there's such a thing that's called ibogaine. Ibogaine is a very different compound. It's got roots in African culture, and this can help with opioid addiction. It's something that I have not experienced yet, but we're talking about like an 18-hour psychedelic trip in which you are basically taken through a journey through ego death and resolution to emerge on the other side. And the effects on opioid addiction are tremendous. The studies are showing that that it's really effective there. In addition to that, the psilocybin studies that are connecting, new neural pathways, neuroplasticity, there, and that's just the sort of scientific level. There is also, Elon Musk tweeted recently that he's microdosing ketamine at parties instead of drinking because it helps him deal with his social anxiety, and megadosing it occasionally in conjunction with therapy so that he can just be his best self. And when someone like that tweets that explicitly about how they're using something like ketamine, which is legal in the United States, there is a huge shift in sort of cultural acceptability for people. So, the CEOs the Silicon Valley CEOs at Burning Man, who are sort of, doing acid quietly and then, not really talking about it in the boardroom, to the microdosers, microdosing psilocybin or LSD in Manhattan, trading on the stock exchange. That's like 10 years old. And what we're looking at into the future is a greater acceptance of the application of psychedelics for individual use to literally make people better people and make the world a better place. And it's something that's been near and dear to my heart for 15 years. And I'm not that old yet, but I've seen a whole bunch of incredible life transforming stories in my time, and it's an exciting industry.
That's a lot of information that you just shared there. So I want to break it down a little bit for my sake and for the audience's sake as well. Can you just go back to basic as to what is considered a psychedelic? And surely of all the compounds that you just mentioned, I'm sure they act differently. So what essentially is the characteristic of psychedelics as a group overall, and then go into details of these few ones that you want to focus on as to how they differ from one another?
Yeah, I just gave you like the fire hose approach to like, you gave me a softball and I turned on the fire hose to just give you everything, like.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good start. At least now we got people's attention, right?
Right. Yeah. So now we can unpack it a little bit. So psychedelics include an immense amount of compounds and molecules. And, something you consider cannabis psychedelic because it is a mind altering substance, psychedelics in general have been used to party, to play, to treat mental illness. And there is in what I think is sort of an important distinction between psychedelics and what are called entheogens. And if your Latin is good, you'll know that entheo means God, right? So entheogen is usually correlated with indigenous tribal cultures and applications of plant medicine. So like ibogaine, ayahuasca, peyote, wachuma, which is a cactus, even coca, in ceremonial settings. Tobacco specifically is also considered an entheogen because it does alter the mind. But those sorts of plant medicines, which are psychedelics, but used in sort of a ceremonial setting, is one kind of category. The other psychedelics, which range from psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, 2CB, the tryptamines, those are used in ways that perturb your consciousness. When you look at what is the usefulness, why is this cool? Why does this matter? Why is it important to perturb our consciousness? The way that I think about it is it helps you get out of the rut. It helps you get out of self-limiting beliefs, self-limiting narratives that you are just Michael Pollan, who wrote How to Change Your Mind, talks about the idea, which I really love, is that for those of you who ski, you get stuck in ski tracks. Your skis are in that ski tracks. You're going down the mountain, and it's tough to kind of pop out of those ski tracks and make new tracks for yourself. And what psychedelics do, who have been clinically proven, is, namely psilocybin, which he talks to at length, gives you an opportunity to get out of that rut, out where you're not really in control. You're just sort of following the path of those ski tracks that have already been laid down. And every time that you go down those ski tracks, you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into that frame of thought.
Now, will you be able to get out of that rut with other means? Or is this, I guess my question is this a shortcut, or is this a best solution?
That's a really great question. Yes, it's a shortcut. I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely it is. Now, there are other ways to reach those altered states of consciousness in which you can change your mind and create those new tracks. Those ways are ecstatic dance, right? Fasting, flotation tanks, flotation therapy, which is near and dear to my heart. I started a chain of float tank centers back in 2012. Meditation, breath work, these are all ways that are considered natural, but do that thing of perturbing your consciousness. They change you into a specific altered state of consciousness. Now, when you are taking 2.5 grams of dried A-strain golden teacher psilocybin, cubensi mushrooms, at 2.5 grams starts to kick in at about 45 minutes if you're fasted. Begins to feel like something is happening to your body and to your brain. There's visual acuity, so your vision actually improves. Your sense perception improves. It almost feels like your peripheral vision expands further out. You're making connections between thoughts and ideas a little bit more. And so, yeah, in 45 minutes, you're going to be going into a trip at that dose that may last 3.5 hours, where you're seeing the connections between things. You're seeing yourself in a new way. So set and setting is what we always talk about within psychedelics, is what is the mindset that you're taking into the use of, again, these sorts of psychedelic substances. What is your mindset, and where are you doing? What is the setting? So many people listening right now are probably thinking, you know what? I've tried mushrooms a couple of times in college, wasn't for me, right? I freaked out. I didn't feel comfortable. And most of those experiences are usually like you're 6 beers deep at a house party in college. You just broke up with your girlfriend. You've got finals to study for in 2 weeks. And then, you take a couple of bites of mushrooms, and then you have a hard trip. You have an uncomfortable trip. But when you do it with more specificity, with intention, with the right set and setting, it can be an amplifier to your thought framework, to your creativity and your productivity, like that.
Amazing. So let me, correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm understanding of what you say about psychedelics being a shortcut versus other means of essentially get you out of the rut, I can obviously see for example, meditation can do that to us. But after a long time, after a couple of weeks of consistency, that sort of make you aware of where you are versus where you want to be. And what I'm understanding is that psychedelic essentially gives you that drastic level of awareness, so you realize where you are stuck and how to get out of. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
Yeah, you're right. And I could simplify it a little bit further. You not only does it help you understand yourself more, which is, talk about like Stoic principles that are still popular, is to just know yourself. And that's tough to do if your normal thoughts and brain patterns and routines through the day, it's like, well, I'm Latt and I do these things and I study this stuff and my friends are like this and I travel here every day. We all get sort of stuck in that. So what psychedelics do is they allow you to know yourself in a new way, and in my opinion, in a deeper way, and they potentiate your ability to think in a new way, to innovate. So you know yourself at a deeper level, and then you have the ability to innovate in a way that you maybe haven't had in a while. And that's why it's so popular in tech. That's why it's so popular, increasingly so when it comes to, even athletic performance. You'd be surprised, Latt, how many professional athletes are using psilocybin. They don't test for it anywhere. Nobody does, but they're using psychedelics to learn how to use their body in a new way, to understand, maybe a jiu-jitsu move or a point of leverage a little bit more, or to go out and enjoy their craft a little bit more. I'm telling you, it is very, very popular. Nobody's talking about it.
Now, my next question is about the effects. Are these effects permanent or transient? Given that the trip only lasts a couple of hours, will they be able to bring those benefits into their lives and practice them after?
This is important. This is critical. So you could make the argument that the research shows that one big psilocybin experience changes your brain forever. They've shown, when you look at the work of like Robin Carhart Harris, that's a good name to go look at the studies that he's doing. When you look at what parts of the brain are lighting up during psilocybin experience, and then you do a longitudinal study and watch what has happened to their brain. Does it last? Are they more creative? Are they, more innovative? Do they feel better about themselves? Has their anxiety decreased? And the answer we think is yes. The research is showing that yes, even one experience does change your brain for the better for the long term. Now, like anything, doing something once and then just going back to your standard operating procedure, the typical day-to-day, you can lose touch with that depth of understanding of the self. And this is where the work that I do comes in, which is to help people who are interested in transformational change make it sticky enough so that it actually works for them in their normal everyday life. People that go to Peru to do ayahuasca have these amazing experiences, and they saw God and turned into a puma, and had a past life regression and really deeply understand themselves and have these amazing experiences. And then they go home and their wife is the same and the food is the same and their friends are the same, and the impact that could have been from that experience diminishes. So what I do and what I think everybody should do is to find a coach that can help you make some sense of what you experienced and then integrate that into your life. So it becomes less of a cognitive explanation and more of a behavioral or habitual or lifestyle explanation. And it's hard to change. It's hard to make new decisions about which way you want to take your life. I'll give you a quick example. So a client of mine, who he's a highly successful CEO at a company that you would recognize, went and did ayahuasca in Peru and came back and was like, I want to change so much of what I'm doing. I want to change my relationship with my wife. I want to reconnect with my kids. I want to sell some of the junk stuff I have that's not bringing me joy. And he was kind of lost. He didn't know how to do that. And he didn't know how to communicate to the people closest to him or his coworkers that like he wanted to make some big life changes. So through our work together, making sense of how is this useful in your life? How has this experience changed you? How do you want it to continue to help you grow as a person, to create greater depth and greater mission? Like that's the work of a coach. That's what a coach is really skilled at. And so it took some time. It took actually quite a lot of time because he was playing at a very high level and operating at a high level. but he was able to subtly make some changes, make some new agreements with his family, make some adjustments on better boundaries at work so that he had better satisfaction. And over time, he got to have his cake and eat it too. He had better income. He had higher performance at work. He had greater satisfaction at home. He lost a bunch of weight. And all of this you could trace back to the experience that he had with psychedelics. So in that way, it does take extra time. It does take more adherence and a commitment to yourself to grow. But, you know, it's sometimes hard to do by yourself.
Yeah. So essentially, it's a multi-stage experience where the first stage is where you have the cognitive awareness and change that happens in your brain. And then there is the translation of that awareness into behavioral change that essentially will make it stick. So that's the difference between using psychedelics and using other means of behavioral change that, you know, takes a longer time to be aware and then for the change to stick on.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. I mean, I can play the devil's advocate here. I've seen, I think, a social media clip of Portland. They interview people in the streets in Portland because they legalized a lot of all these different psychedelics and drugs, and people are claiming that the legalization of these drugs leads to essentially legalization of crime. What do you think of that?
That's a tricky spot.
Right.
I'm in Seattle, not far from Portland, and we haven't figured it out yet, honestly. You know, Portugal is really sort of the shining example of what happens when you legalize drugs. And let me be very clear. There is a difference between heroin and LSD. There is a difference between
fentanyl,
fentanyl and psilocybin, you know, and people don't get addicted to ayahuasca. You know, people don't get addicted to LSD. There's just the time and the research just doesn't support that whatsoever. You know, you smoke DMT, you're going to want to wait for a while before you do that again, because you got to figure out what just happened. There's a lot of integration that's required. So it's not like you're not rushing out to do that again. So as far as policy is concerned, here in the United States, Colorado and Oregon have changed their policies around decriminalizing psychedelics. I've been following it really closely and have a lot of friends in the industry. It's a bumpy road. Everybody's kind of pointing at each other to say, okay, well, what do you think we should do? I don't know what we should do. Well, you got to live here. You've got to be a therapist. You know, how do we handle dosage? You know, what's aftercare look like for people who are interested in doing, you know, a MDMA assisted psychotherapy? So I think that that's a very different paradigm than the legalization of drugs altogether, and, you know, being okay or tolerating in my state of Washington, giving out syringes for people to shoot up on the streets of Seattle. Like, I am not a fan of that whatsoever. So I think that we're figuring it out, but you know, the policies and protocols that have worked in Portugal in decriminalizing drugs, we are years and years away from figuring out the right way to do this. And, you know, so I don't really have I don't have a great answer, but I think it's an apples and oranges thing. Yeah. And nobody really knows how to handle it yet. But that said, I think that there will be a time, sometime in the next 5, 10, 15 years, where we understand how to help people who are dealing with mental health struggles, who are self-medicating with things like fentanyl and other street drugs, and help them get into treatment and service their mental health issues with the use of psychedelics and therapy and coaching, so that they can actually make improvements. So I think that it's going to take some time.
Yeah, and that's fair. And the reason I ask is because I grew up in a country where if you come into the country with any drug, even marijuana, even a small amount, you may be prosecuted. You may be executed and death by hanging in Malaysia. And a lot of Southeast Asian countries are like that. Indonesia, I know it's like that. I think Singapore is like that. So growing up in that kind of environment, it wasn't until later that I learned about the science of it, how it's being used for therapy and how ketamine is being used, and all that, and how psilocybin is being used for terminal patients to accept death better. So let's get into the science of these different compounds real quick as well. Why, do you know the science behind, say, psilocybin in death acceptance? How does that work?
I'll be totally honest. When it comes to the scientific research, when it comes to, correlations and stuff, that's not my strength. My strength is understanding sort of boots on the ground, one-to-one experiences. And here's the other thing too, is the clinical trials in a hospital or in a research center where things are very sterile, and there's like a Johns Hopkins playlist of music that happens while you're on psilocybin that has been, custom curated to give you a powerful mystical experience to prepare you for end of life, to decrease your anxiety about death if you're a terminal cancer patient. That's something very different, I think, than my focus and certainly my experience, which is to sit for people as a trip sitter and as a guide with people who are looking to improve themselves. So what I believe is that when you can have an experience through the ingestion of psilocybin or NN-DMT or 5-MeO-DMT, which is bufo, which is the Sonoran desert toad, those are the most potent psychedelics on the planet. What I've experienced happening is that when you can create a bit of distance, and this ketamine kind of does this as well as a dissociative, when you can create a distance between what it means to be Sean and all of these ideas I have about myself and my body and my life and all my hang-ups and all my traumas that I'm carrying around with me every single day in my amygdala, to then have an experience where I am in awe of reality. I am in awe of consciousness. I am in awe and absolutely fascinated by the green grass that I'm walking through, or a tree that I can actually see breathing and providing oxygen for me, or having an immersive experience that kind of helps you get out of your stuff. It helps you disconnect from all of the stories that you're telling yourself. There's an ease there. Your shoulders drop down and back. Your breathing slows down. You realize that you are not your body. You are not even your mind. You are something else. And those sorts of transcendent experiences that come through psychedelics allow you to slow down and disconnect and sometimes disassociate from the unknowing that comes that's coming down the road for all of us. None of us are making it out alive, Latt. Not a single one of us. And so when we understand, when we can have an experience in consciousness that's one of love and joy and peace, where my tape recorder of trauma isn't constantly playing in my background, and I can just sort of be at ease and at peace a little bit with my own consciousness, then when I realize I'm not my body and I'm not my mind, I'm not my thoughts, I am something else, then my anticipation for my last day on earth and what comes next eases a little bit. Now, we could go way deeper than this. We can go way deeper than this, because what people who have experienced near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, I part of my experience in consciousness and some of my spiritual training includes astral projection. So I was purposefully projecting out of body in float tanks every single night for not every single night, but just about every night for 18 months. I trained and practiced and trained my body to have an astral projection with recall every single night.
I get to interview all these doctors, scientists, and cool people in this health and fitness industry, all made possible because of this podcast that is funded by the company I work for, which is Health via Modern Nutrition, or H.V.M.N. And it is not that they pay me to do this, but I genuinely love and believe in the product Ketone-IQ. I use it every day before my podcast, before my workout, or even after my workout for recovery. There hasn't been a single supplement that can give me such a drastic change in subjective feel within minutes as much as Ketone-IQ has. For those of you who do not know me, I'm from Malaysia, I got my PhD from the UK, and my passion is in science and chronic diseases, and I believe it is all about transparency, scientific integrity, and about sharing with everyone so that everyone can benefit from it. And if you like this content and our work, please do support us by liking, leaving a review, or sharing with your friends and families, or even buying a shot of Ketone-IQ at any Sprouts nationwide in the US, and the first shot is on us. Just scan the QR code and you'll get your money back for your first shot. You can also use the code H.V.M.N.POD20, that is H.V.M.N.POD20, and get 20% off your first purchase at the H.V.M.N. website.
Now, when you have a near-death experience, which is by nature disassociative, I am not this meat suit, I am not my trauma, I am something else, you become more aware that there is peace and there is stillness beyond this human experience in this life right now. And that is a profound awareness. When you talk to people who've died and come back on the operating table, they'll tell you like, yeah, there was a light at the end of the tunnel maybe, or yes, I had this recall of all the memories of my life. But most people will say that there is a stillness and peace that they experienced. And I think that especially 5-MeO-DMT and N-DMT and some other of these compounds give us a little bit of a hint of that, because what do you know? There's DMT in our pineal gland that we can look at the work of Rick Strassman, and now we know that we actually have DMT, dimethyltryptamine, inside of our own brain. So when you can kind of tap into that, then you realize like, okay, there is more, there is something else, and I don't need to worry about it because it's out of my control. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And I had the pleasure to meet Anita Mujani. She had a near-death experience. She had terminal cancer, and she basically died for quite a few hours. I met her end of last year. She gave her talk and shared her experience on TED Talk, actually. And she came back to life, and in the next few days, her tumor reduced in size by 70%. Don't know how that happens. Like, the doctors were very, very stunned. But that was, check her out.
Wow.
Anita Mojani. She's on YouTube and all that. And I met her at the Levels event last year. It was really funny because her background is Indian, but she spoke fluent Cantonese because she lived in Hong Kong. And we were just speaking Cantonese because I grew up with, like, my mom spoke Cantonese. So, but yeah, I digress. But let's go back into, you said you were a trip sitter, right? Share with us some interesting stories that you've come across. And, especially with ketamine, I know that if you overdose and you get into K-hole, they call it, right? Like, what is that? How does that feel? What sort of interesting stories have you come across?
Well, I'm a fan of pushing the envelope. You probably get that sense already. My experience sitting for people and some of the work that I do with coaching clients is totally range. I think it's important to frame a distinction between what people think of as a bad trip and what I like to think of as a hard trip. Now, if you took a whole bunch of something, let's just say psilocybin, You took a whole bunch. What's a whole bunch? So 5 dried grams in darkness is the hero's journey. It's the hero's trip, right? Hero's dose. Let's say you took even more than that, and you lost the ability. Your dexterity fails, so you become less operational physically, which is very, very common at really high doses. So you can't really move much. You certainly can't tie your shoes. You can't put words together. That can be a really scary experience because you feel like maybe, oop, I did too much. I'm not coming back. This is, I've injured myself. That is, that's common. That happens. Now, before the trip itself, we go through some of the details of what could happen. So we sort of prepare, we set intentions, and we come to an understanding that you're gonna be okay. This is not permanent. You're eventually going to move through whatever this deep experience is, and you'll begin to come back. Now, that might be 4.5 or 5 hours, and in that time, you're having deep introspective thoughts about your life and your childhood, or your shortcomings, your trauma, and you could think of that as a bad trip, but what it oftentimes is just, it's hard. It's really hard. And you could spend a decade doing therapy to talk about what happened in your childhood, to talk about the traumas that you experienced, why you are the way you are. And in 6 hours in a big psilocybin trip, you're going to cover that stuff probably too. You're going to come to terms with who you are, the things that you've done, your shortcomings, your anxiety, your traumas, and you're going to work through some of that stuff. I was working with a client very, very recently, actually, and we were doing NN-DMT. And going into the weekend, we were talking about what his intentions were. What do you hope to walk away from this weekend with? How do you want to grow? What changes do you want to make in your life? And how is it that you hope that your experience with these psychedelics helps inform this progress in your life? And so we talked about, his relationship with his family. He's a very successful guy. The relationship with his family, the relationship with with himself. I asked him a question. I asked him, do you like yourself? This was, before we had any psychedelics. And I said, do you like yourself? And he couldn't really answer that question. I mean, everyone listening right now, really, if you can today, sit for 5 minutes and ask yourself, do I like myself? And then think about that. It's a useful exercise for everyone to kind of orient how they see themselves. And if you don't, what are you willing to change? So we sit down, had some DMT, and he went very deep, very deep. Went to this place where he was not who his sort of materialist collective reality said that he was. He was not this life anymore. He was in a state of consciousness, of pure consciousness. And in that state of pure consciousness, he was able to connect with distant relatives that he hadn't seen since he was a child. He was able to connect with spirit animals that were there to guide him, which is some of the stuff that we talked about beforehand. And then he totally broke down, and he cried for probably 25 minutes. And for those of you listening, and maybe maybe you don't, but most DMT experiences are about 15 minutes, like front to back, from inhalation to here I am, I'm back, I'm just regular old me again. That's usually about 15 or 20 minutes. So he broke down, he let go, he surrendered to this experience, and was flooded with love and knowledge and support, not only from his spirit animals, but from his ancestor and his family, he was able to orient around the things that were most important to him in his life, and to make some resolutions about what needed to change. What stories was he telling himself that he needed to let go of? And he wept and he wept and he wept. And I'm sitting there, doing my thing, very quietly, very neutral. That's an important part of these sorts of experiences. Like, I'm not telling you what to think or how to think. I'm not I'm not there to frame your experience whatsoever, but just to hold space. And then he came to his experience was a bit longer. It was more like 25 or 30 minutes. And he's like, I'm a different person. What I just went through totally changed the way that I see myself. I have so many things that I've been carrying with me since my childhood that I just let go of. Not only was that an absolutely incredible visual experience, like the most intense mystical experience that I've ever had in my entire life, but I also just learned a whole bunch about myself and what I need to let go of. And so, have a drink of water, drink some tea. In that case, we actually drank some kava afterward, sat around, chilled out, and chatted for hours afterward. And it was in that fulcrum point of, man, that was big. And now I want to work through it. I want to talk through some of this stuff. I'm not a therapist, right? So I can't help him work through his childhood trauma. But what I can help him do is help him build a plan forward. What do you want to do with this new awareness? So what, you've had a spiritual awakening. What do you want to do now? I've had experiences in ayahuasca ceremonies, assisting. I'm also not a shaman, but I've assisted in a number, many ayahuasca ceremonies, 25 people having, deep experiences. Another interesting moment. One time there was a gentleman that needed help to get outside because he had to go use the bathroom. And so I went over and I helped him up. This is in the pitch black. Helped him up, walked him outside to his to the bathroom, and he said, he's like, who are you? And I said, I'm Sean. We met earlier. He goes, are you one of them? And I said, one of who? And he said, are you one of the angels that visited me today? And I said, I'm Sean, I'm here to help. So get him into the bathroom. He comes out, and we sit down for a second before we head back into the yurt. And he said, I have been surrounded by beings of light for the last 6 hours. He's not as clear as I'm saying it. And he said, I thought you were an angel. And I said, no, I'm just a guide helping you here tonight. And he said, that the angels are all here to help all of us. And this guy was not religious whatsoever, but he had this deep experience that there were non-physical entities that were there to help him in a very real way. And so, I got him situated back on his mat, and I talked to him the next day, and he said, hey, I was having a little moment there when you helped me into the bathroom, and I thought you were an angel, but I'm convinced that they're real. I'm convinced that there are a lot of things that none of us can see that are always present and want to help us. And I was like, beautiful, like wonderful. It's not for me to judge what that experience is. So those are just two little anecdotes, but those are the types of experiences that can change you forever.
Yeah. I mean, see, coming from a scientific background as a scientist, I don't doubt their experience whatsoever, right? I don't doubt what they see, what they experience, what they've gone through. But a part of me asks, is that purely hallucination? Is that just your mind playing tricks at you? And I think the best way to find that out is to experience myself, right?
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, end of one
waiting for that.
End of one experiment at the end of the day. Like, it's going to be hard to even run a study about it, to like how to measure, right? And this is just looking from a very objective lens and a very secular sort of point of view.
Well, here's the thing. I'm working on that right now. I'm in the beginning phases of of working on ways to measure and substantiate and understand some of these brainwave states, at the height of these experiences with some really awesome cutting edge technology that I'd be happy to share with you after we turn the mics off.
Hey, if you need a critical brain that will poke holes, like, I'm happy to do that.
We want all the critical brains to poke all the holes because we want to understand. And here's the thing, right? Like, when it comes to sort of materialist, reductionist, Newtonian understandings of the way that the world works, we are nowhere near being able to understand what consciousness is, right? Let alone altered states of consciousness in psychedelic states. But we should still try.
Yeah.
We should still study. So yes, that's really important. Yes, it's very important, I think, for highly intelligent people who are open to entertain new ideas to have these experiences. And I've seen a number of people who were very skeptical who, similarly to you, say, I just want to know. I want to know what that's like, And I've seen them have experiences they can't explain, and that's okay, but they know something happened. I'll give you one other little story that it blew my mind. So the very first time that I drank ayahuasca, this was like 2010, I had this visual experience, that lasted, a typical ayahuasca ceremony can run from 6 to 9 hours, right? I had 2 of those hours where I was in another place where there were these flying buttresses, these insane structures with, changing geometric architecture. And I was walking through this space and I was in awe of this whole thing. It was like the most intense thing I'd ever experienced. And afterward, there's like some fellowship happening. People drink tea. They, sometimes they share what they've experienced. And I was next to this guy named, let's call him Mike. I was sitting next to Mike inside the yurt. And I said, hey, we're sharing our experiences. And I said, there was a time for like 2 hours, it felt like, where I was walking through this other realm. And he's like, oh yeah, with like the geometric architecture. And I was like, yeah. And I said, but it was like, almost like Indian, like flying buttresses, these giant columns that were sort of cascading. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, they were blue and green, right? And I was like, they were blue and green. And so he and I are going through our recollections of this experience from hours ago, and they were so similar. And I was like, how on earth were we sharing that same hallucination or visual experience? And for him, he's like, that's really common. He's like, that's not a big deal. Like, we were sitting next to each other. We were sort of sharing some of the energy. Maybe you were taking me with you. Maybe I was taking you with me, but that's happened before. It happens fairly frequently. And I'm like, that blows my mind. Like, I called my wife the next day and I was like, you're not going to believe this, but me and Mike were traveling through other realms together. He described specifically, explicitly, some of the same visual experiences that I had. So that, how do you explain that?
Yeah, I don't know how to explain that. So that's definitely an area that needs a lot more understanding. I think, we need the technology to be able to measure that first and foremost, and then the knowledge, the understanding, and all of that. And I think there are a lot, like you said, there are a lot more in this world on how this world works and how the body works, and that we still have yet to even touch the surface.
Yeah. For, I think, your sake and my sake, I'm interested in how this improves performance, right? Like, it's not just a light show I'm showing up for and spacing out and going, whoa, that's really cool. Like, that's fine. But what I'm interested is, how does that improve the human experience? How does that make you a better person, a higher level performer? Maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but LSD has this insane pain relieving ability. Ask any hippie that's been to a festival and danced for 3 days straight. Like, how is it that your body isn't sore from all of this dancing? And I was actually reminded of this. I went to Wonderland, which was hosted by Microdose, which is, basically the leading psychedelic sort of platform, media platform aggregator in the world. So I went to Miami for Wonderland and took a fair bit of acid for the final party on the last night. And the DJ was spinning and there was cool lights. It was really a wonderful time. But I had a pretty serious foot injury 2 weeks before. And so I traveled to Miami like with a walking boot on. And there was a couple of times in the couple of days prior to this final evening where I was on crutches because my foot hurt so bad. Traveling didn't help, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I decided to roll the dice and not wear the boot for the final night. And my foot felt amazing. Like, I had zero pain. I had zero inflammation. And one of my friends who's an ER doctor, I'm like, man, my foot feels great. And he goes, well, LSD has pain relieving aspects to it. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't even know at the time. But like, just that alone, the fact that LSD has the ability to relieve pain, I know that they're looking at, developing some psychedelics without the psychotropic element, without the mind altering element to have, to serve some of those purposes. But in general, I'm interested in how this makes us better people, better planet, higher performers, making better decisions with more love. Like that's what's interesting to me.
Yeah. And how do you know what compound to use to treat what kind of people? Surely there's no standard practice that you can follow. It's more, I assume, based on experience.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. It's based on experience. You could probably pull some clinical trials, but if you're sad or fearful, depressed, MDMA or MDA is an excellent place to start. In fact, MDMA or MDA are excellent places to start if you've never had psychedelics before, because it's heart opening. You feel good, you feel happy, you feel connected, you feel like the world isn't that bad of a place. It's mild enough that it's not going to blow your mind and make you, freak out, but strong enough to reorient some of those pleasure centers and to make you sort of appreciate life itself a little bit more. If you're looking at, anxiety and depression, psilocybin is a really excellent option. If you're interested in, the rocket ship to another dimension to really, really stretch your perception of reality, because you just need to be, you are interested in the wonderment of the world, and you sort of lost some of your zest for life, DMT is an excellent option. Again, like ketamine, which is, again, legal across the country. You can go to ketamine clinics. There's a bunch of them, and I do your research first to find a really reputable clinic to do this with a really great therapist. But if you have depression, ketamine is a really, really excellent place to start. So yeah, I mean, and that's part of the process is for me to help people understand, well, what are you interested in? What are you working on? What do you want to improve? Where do you want to go? And then curating the right types of compounds to that end. And it's never boring.
There you go. That's the cheat sheet from Sean right there. Thank you for sharing that. So we talked a lot, this episode, we talked a lot about sensory and different feelings and different experiences people go through. I'm going to take a 180 turn and talk about sensory deprivation.
Yeah.
And I know you've been through more than 500 hours of sensory deprivation. How does that fall into the types of coaching that you do together with psychedelic, which enhances sensory experience?
Yeah. So the quick, 3-level elevator ride to explain what sensory deprivation is: 10 inches of Epsom salt water with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt in it in a float tank. You've probably heard of that. Float tanks, isolation tank, therapy. This is all the same name for the same thing. For an hour or 90 minutes, you float naked in 10 inches of Epsom salt water with extremely reduced sensory input. So you're weightless, which does incredible things for your central nervous system. You can't hear anything. You've got earplugs. It's really quiet. Can't see anything because it's really dark. Can't smell anything because, the Epsom salt dissolves and doesn't really have an odor. You can't really touch anything because you are weightless with your hands up and you're, sort of like a snow angel in the water. What did I miss? So with this reduced sensory input, they used to think that if you didn't have sensory input, you would just fall asleep. And John Lilly, the creator of the flotation tank, proved the opposite. When you don't have sensory input, you get into what's called the theta brainwave state. And the theta brainwave state is what meditators are seeking at the heart of what they're doing, is to get into theta. And when you're in theta, you're not awake and you are awake. You're not asleep, but you're not thinking, crunching numbers, using the left brain to like make connections between what you have to do today and what's on the grocery list. And you're not also, composing music with your right brain and coming up with sketch ideas for Saturday Night Live. You're in this sort of state of stillness. You're in a meditative state. And what that does is the float tank kind of meditates you to a certain extent. All you have to do is lay there and breathe. There's also an insane number of physical benefits from the weightlessness. You get spinal traction in your back, so the discs in your back get to puff up as you're weightless in the salt water. Your skin absorbs the magnesium sulfate, so you're getting magnesium, which lubricates the synovial fluid in your tendons and your joints. It's anti-inflammatory, so you're feeling less inflamed. And what this does is it's the equivalent of very deep meditation without a method. And often what happens is people think about, man, this feels weird. Oh, man, this feels good. Oh, man, I've got stuff to do today. And then they go to, well, I've got stuff to do in life. Well, what's my life all about? They go through this chain of thought processes, and then eventually, maybe it's 45 minutes, maybe it's 55 minutes. You get to this point where you've kind of thought through a lot of the things that have been bothering you, and then you can just bliss out. And that's oftentimes when people get into this theta state. Now, where this matters in as far as my coaching and why this is so critical for people is we are never in that state. Like, even when you're meditating, you're sitting, so gravity is keeping your butt on that meditation pillow. So your spine has to navigate that. If you're in a zero gravity chair, which is taking it to a next level, maybe you've got like a mindfold on or blindfold on and earplugs, you're still having to deal with gravity. So what you're able to do is give yourself an incredible experience within this theta brainwave state. Your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest, digest, your blood flow, these sorts of things that you're not conscious of, that stuff kicks on, right? So your blood flows better, your digestion improves, you get to relax a bit, and your sympathetic nervous system gets quieted. There's a bunch of research that looks at the effect on the default mode network of the brain, which is, in my mind, I like to think of it as kind of like the ego, right? It's like when you're not, when it's just you sitting in a quiet place, what does your brain do? Where do you go to, right? Do you solve problems? Do you sing songs? This default mode network. In fact, Latt, maybe you could do a better job of explaining what the default mode network is.
No, I'm actually not familiar with that.
Okay, so the default mode network essentially is when the dust is settled in your snow globe. What is that sort of conscious experience that you're having? Are you self-critical? Are you quiet? Are you calm? So
that inner voice.
Yes, exactly. So that gets quieted, and that actually happens as well during psychedelic experiences, is that default mode network, which for some people is super loud. The inner voice is going, as soon as it's quiet, the inner voice gets really loud. Oftentimes people who have trouble getting to sleep experience that. They have a really loud inner voice. They have a really busy default mode network. So when you get into that state, you're able to rest, recuperate, and calm and chill, meditate to a certain extent. You're getting this effect on your body. And so the potential within that experience to get that not only recovery and help with sleep and stress mitigation, better circulation, is a better understanding of how you think and how you deal with reality, completely natural without psychedelics. So I've had, pro athletes floating, going through some of their, quarterback progressions. I've had golfers, go through their golf swing over and over and over. We know the power of visualization as far as sports performance. They've actually done some studies around free throws, and in the float tank, picturing sinking free throws. And there was actually some pretty strong results that by going through free throws, I think darts was the other one, they actually improved their performance by going through the visualization process of being accurate with free throws. So the potential for performance optimization in the flow tank, there's 1,000 different reasons, but you can use it in however which way that you like. But it does absolutely correlate to who do you want to be? Where do you want to focus your attention? How do you want to make improvements, and how do you slow that down so that you can?
That sounds amazing. Do you have a flotation device at your place, or?
I don't. I've got one 10 minutes away that I at the float center that I go to probably, I don't know, it's about once a week now.
Wow. And how long do you normally do it for?
Almost always an hour.
Always an hour. I
Yep.
see. Okay. Well, we've got a lot of things that I think a lot of people are going to be very interested to try, myself included. I think, in the biohacking world, there's the traditional like sauna, hot and cold exposure and ketones and all of that. And then there is out of the body experience and take it to the next level, sort of, we have unpacked so much in terms of psychedelics, psychedelic therapy, in terms of what are the differences between compounds and differences between experiences. And I hope for you who are listening, who are watching, you got something out of this conversation. And thank you, Sean, for sharing so much insight and information around this. For those who are interested in finding you and learning more about the stuff that you do, how can they find you, Sean?
Yeah, super easy. You just go to SeanMcCormick.com. It's SeanMcCormick.com. And then on Instagram, where I'm most active, it's real Sean McCormick. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me, and all the podcasts and the coaching offerings and the biohacking store is all on SeanMcCormick.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for being on our H.V.M.N. podcast. It has been a pleasure chatting with you, and I've learned so much today, as I always do whenever I talk with all the guests. So thank you very much.
This was so much fun, Latt. I'm such a fan of the work that you're doing. I'm such a fan of H.V.M.N. I mean, you guys are doing so much right, so many things right, and your podcast has so many great guests. It's really an honor to be included on the guest list.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.